I am Liam, 32 years old. 10 months ago, my parents committed the ultimate act of betrayal by deliberately abandoning me on my wedding day, leaving two perfectly decorated, empty chairs in the very front row for every single guest to stare at. While I was standing at the altar, desperately trying to hold back tears of absolute humiliation as I married the love of my life, my parents were across town. They were laughing loudly, drinking expensive vintage champagne, and focusing entirely on my younger brother, Julian. They literally told our extended relatives and lifelong family friends that they had far more important family matters to attend to that weekend. But there is one massive thing they did not know. They did not know that their precious golden child was about to completely destroy their perfect, carefully curated public reputation, and that the brutal legal and financial reality of their horrific decisions would soon leave them begging for my forgiveness. Before I tell you exactly how their flawless world came crashing down around them, please hit the like button if you believe in absolute justice. And do not forget to let me know exactly where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let us go back to the exact moment the illusion shattered completely. The reception hall at the Botanical Gardens was perfectly decorated. We had spent over a year planning every single microscopic detail. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden, flickering glow over the massive round tables draped in pristine, heavy white linen. The floral arrangements were massive cascades of white roses and green ivy, exactly what my beautiful wife, Sarah, had dreamed of since she was a little girl. The professional jazz band was playing a soft, romantic melody in the far corner of the massive room, setting an elegant and sophisticated mood for the evening. It was supposed to be the absolute happiest, most triumphant night of my entire life. But my eyes kept drifting uncontrollably to table number 1, right at the edge of the polished wooden dance floor. There, situated right next to Sarah's incredibly warm and wonderful parents, were two empty, dark mahogany chairs. I had personally handwritten and carefully tied the little ivory cardstock name tags to the backs of them using silk ribbons. One beautifully written tag read Father of the Groom. The other beautifully written tag read Mother of the Groom. Those two small pieces of paper mocked me relentlessly all night long, screaming my ultimate rejection to a room full of 150 people. I am an emergency room nurse. I deal with severe physical trauma, massive multi-vehicle car accidents, and literal life-or-death medical situations every single day of my working life. I have held the trembling hands of terrified people taking their very last breath in this world. I thought I knew exactly what genuine pain felt like. I truly thought I had built up a permanent, impenetrable immunity to human suffering. But staring blankly at those empty chairs, realizing with absolute certainty that my own mother and father actively chose to completely ignore my wedding, was a physical kind of agony I was entirely unprepared for. It felt exactly like a heavy, jagged cinder block sitting right on my chest, slowly crushing my lungs and making it impossible to draw a full breath. Sarah, sensing my internal collapse, reached over and grabbed my hand under the heavy tablecloth. She squeezed my fingers so tightly her knuckles turned completely white. She did not say a single word. She did not need to speak. Her beautiful, empathetic eyes told me absolutely everything I needed to know. She saw my profound, bleeding heartbreak, and she was entirely willing to carry the massive weight of it with me for the rest of our lives. We got through the long night somehow. I expertly faked a bright, joyful smile for the expensive photographer we hired. I shook dozens of hands, hugged distant relatives, and warmly thanked our guests for spending their hard-earned money to travel from out of town. I danced with my beautiful bride under the dim, romantic lights, whispering in her ear that I loved her more than life itself. But when we finally left the venue, rode the quiet elevator up to our floor, and walked into our expensive hotel suite, the sheer physical exhaustion and profound emotional devastation hit me like a runaway freight train. I did not even turn on the main lights. I sat heavily on the edge of the large king-sized bed, slowly untied my expensive silk tie, and just stared blankly at the ugly floral pattern on the wallpaper. My phone suddenly buzzed loudly on the wooden nightstand, the screen illuminating the dark room. For a split second, a pathetic, hopelessly childish part of me desperately hoped it was them. I prayed it was a frantic text from my dad saying there had been a terrible medical emergency, a massive flat tire on the highway, or a huge, catastrophic misunderstanding. Something. Anything at all to logically explain why they abandoned their eldest son on the most important day of his life. I leaned over and picked up the heavy phone. It was a text message from my mother. It came in at exactly 1 o'clock in the morning. It did not say congratulations on your beautiful marriage. It did not ask how the wedding ceremony went or if Sarah looked beautiful in her expensive dress. It did not offer a single word of apology or explanation. It read exactly like this. Do not forget Julian's birthday is next weekend. We are hosting a highly private, catered dinner at the main country club. Make sure you bring a very nice gift. He just got a massive corporate promotion and we want to make it incredibly special for him. I stared at the glowing digital screen until the harsh black words completely blurred together into a meaningless shape. My own wedding day had just ended less than an hour ago. My expensive suit jacket was still draped carelessly over the back of a chair. And my mother was already aggressively demanding that I spend my money to celebrate my younger brother's upcoming birthday. I did not throw the phone against the wall. I did not scream out loud into the quiet room. I just quietly set the device face down on the table, walked slowly into the cold hotel bathroom, and splashed freezing cold tap water on my pale face. Looking closely at my exhausted reflection in the bright vanity mirror, I made a silent, ironclad promise to myself. I was entirely done. The 32 long, miserable years of practically begging for their basic parental approval, of trying so desperately to be the perfect, obedient son, of hoping they would just look at me with an ounce of the immense pride they constantly reserved for Julian. It was all permanently over. That incredibly selfish midnight text message was the absolute final straw. I thought the worst part of my life was finally over, but I was so incredibly wrong about what was coming next. To truly understand the absolute, unhinged insanity of my toxic family dynamic, you have to completely understand Julian. Julian is 29 years old, a highly paid director of marketing for a massive tech firm, and the absolute, undisputed king of our family universe. Since the very day he was brought home from the hospital, my parents treated him like pure, untouchable royalty. If I got a B on an advanced calculus test in high school, I was grounded for an entire month, called lazy, and told I would end up working a minimum wage job for the rest of my life. If Julian got a completely failing grade in basic history, the teacher was clearly incompetent, the curriculum was flawed, and my parents would immediately drive to the school to threaten a massive lawsuit against the entire local school district. They constantly poured thousands of dollars into his massive college fund while explicitly telling me I needed to figure out my own complex financial aid because building character was important for me, but apparently not for him. I vividly and painfully remember the exact day I graduated from my rigorous nursing school program. I was the official valedictorian of my entire graduating class. I spent 4 absolutely grueling years working double night shifts as a lowly medical assistant, cleaning up bodily fluids, organizing supply closets at 3 in the morning, and sleeping in my cheap car just to pay my heavy tuition so I would not have to take out massive, crippling student loans. I was so incredibly proud of that hard-earned nursing degree. I drove my beat-up sedan to my parents' large, immaculate house in the wealthy suburbs for what I foolishly thought was going to be a special graduation dinner dedicated solely to my hard work. When I pulled up to the large, sweeping concrete driveway, there were 20 expensive luxury cars parked lining the entire street. I walked through the side gate into the sprawling, perfectly landscaped backyard, wearing my only decent, slightly ill-fitting graduation suit, fully expecting to see a bright, colorful banner with my name written on it. Instead, I found my entire extended family holding expensive crystal champagne flutes, cheering loudly around the massive stone patio. My dad was standing proudly on the raised wooden deck, his arm wrapped tightly around Julian's shoulders. He proudly announced to the massive, cheering crowd that Julian had just been promoted to a junior executive position at his massive corporate firm and had utilized his new massive salary to buy his very first brand new Porsche. I stood there near the wooden garden gate, completely frozen, holding my nursing diploma tightly in a cheap, faux leather binder. My mother walked right past me, carrying a heavy silver tray of expensive, locally catered appetizers. She barely even looked at my face. She just patted my shoulder dismissively without making eye contact and told me to grab a cheap diet soda from the plastic red cooler sitting in the dirt by the garage. Later that same agonizing evening, my dad aggressively cornered me in the cramped kitchen while everyone else was outside admiring the new car. He looked down critically at my diploma resting on the granite counter, scoffed loudly, and shook his head in absolute, unconcealed disgust. He told me directly to my face that nursing was strictly women's work and beneath our family standards. He asked me, completely straight-faced, when I was going to finally grow up and get a real career, something with a massive corporate salary, lucrative stock options, and a solid 401k plan. He said I desperately needed a real job that could actually build a solid real estate portfolio and generate a massive inheritance for my future children, exactly like Julian was currently doing. He said my life choices were an absolute embarrassment to our prestigious family name. I swallowed the thick, painful lump of pure rejection in my throat, took my hard-earned diploma off the counter, and quietly left the loud house through the side door. Not a single person noticed I was gone. Everything in my bleak, miserable world changed completely when I finally met Sarah. Sarah is a licensed pediatric physical therapist. She is brilliant, fiercely loyal, completely independent, and absolutely immune to any kind of manipulative family nonsense. When she finally brought me home to meet her parents for the very first time during a massive Thanksgiving dinner, I was absolutely terrified. I expected to be ruthlessly interrogated about my finances. I fully expected them to judge my modest hospital salary and aggressively question my unconventional career choice. Her father, Arthur, is a retired, highly respected cardiovascular surgeon who spent 30 years saving lives in the busiest trauma center in the state. When I nervously sat at his dining table and told him I was an ER nurse, he did not scoff or roll his eyes. He set his heavy silver fork down on the table, looked me dead in the eye with complete respect, and told me that nurses were the absolute, undeniable backbone of the entire medical system. He told the whole quiet table that he trusted his experienced nurses far more than half the arrogant, overpaid doctors he worked with on a daily basis. Her mother, Martha, kept warmly piling delicious, home-cooked food onto my plate and asking me genuine, interested questions about my personal hobbies, my future dreams, and my favorite books. For the first very time in my entire adult life, I felt truly visible and deeply valued as a human being. I realized sitting at that warm, brightly lit dining table that this is what a normal, loving family actually looked like. They did not care about designer clothes, expensive country club memberships, or luxury cars. They cared entirely about human character and kindness. When Sarah and I finally got officially engaged, my parents barely even acknowledged the massive milestone in my life. We hosted a small, intimate, beautifully catered engagement party at a very nice local restaurant downtown. They showed up an entire hour late, wearing clothes far too casual for the venue, complained loudly to the waitstaff about the quality of the appetizers, and spent the entire evening huddled in the far, dark corner. They spent the entire night loudly discussing Julian's recent luxury vacation to Europe, completely ignoring Sarah's wonderful family who had flown in from out of state. But the real, terrifying waking nightmare started when we began planning the actual wedding ceremony. Sarah and I proudly paid for absolutely everything ourselves. We dipped into our hard-earned savings. We did not ask my wealthy parents for a single dime of their money. All we asked was for them to simply show up, smile for the professional pictures, and be a supportive part of the celebration. We carefully mailed out the formal, heavy, embossed paper invitations 3 full months in advance. The official RSVP deadline slowly came and eventually went without a single word. No response at all. I called my mother on a random Tuesday afternoon. She dismissively told me she was entirely too busy organizing a local, high-profile charity gala and dealing with tedious HOA meetings to bother checking her mail. I texted my dad a week later asking for a simple yes or no. He left me on read for 3 entire days before finally replying with a single, insulting thumbs-up emoji. During this incredibly stressful, heartbreaking time, my older cousin Mark acted like a wonderful, supportive shoulder to cry on. Mark would constantly take me out for cheap beers at the local pub, sit across from me at the sticky wooden tables, listen to me vent for hours about my parents' incredible coldness, and tell me to just be the bigger person. He kept repeatedly saying that family is family, that blood is thicker than water, and I should just quietly endure the blatant disrespect to keep the overall peace. I foolishly trusted him with my deepest, most painful insecurities. I had absolutely no idea that Mark was driving straight to my parents' house immediately after our drinks. He was repeating every single vulnerable, private word I said, maliciously spinning the entire narrative to make me look like a hysterical, deeply jealous, entirely unhinged older brother. He desperately wanted to secure his own permanent spot in their good financial graces, probably hoping they would eventually help him pay off his massive, mounting credit card debt. He was actively feeding them private information, and they were eagerly using it to fully justify their cruel, dismissive behavior toward my wedding. The absolute betrayal was quietly building in the background, waiting to absolutely destroy me. 2 full weeks after we returned from our peaceful, quiet honeymoon in the mountains, I finally got my parents on the phone to demand a real explanation. I asked them point-blank why they deliberately skipped my wedding to stay home. My mother did not hesitate for a single microsecond. She launched into a highly rehearsed, incredibly dramatic, tearful performance. She claimed loudly that they never received the formal invitation. She said they waited sadly by the mailbox for weeks, deeply hurt and crying every single night that their cruel eldest son would maliciously exclude them from his special day. She actually said I was a cruel, vindictive, hateful child for cutting them out of my life without any warning. I told her clearly, keeping my voice dangerously calm, that I had official, printed delivery confirmation from the Federal Post Office for the physical invitations. I told her I had digital, time-stamped red receipts for the electronic invites I sent as backups. I told her I knew exactly what she was doing and that she was lying straight through her teeth to avoid taking responsibility. My father aggressively grabbed the phone from her hand. He raised his loud, booming voice, instantly adopting that terrifying, commanding tone he used to frighten me into submission when I was a helpless little kid. He told me I was completely delusional and mentally unwell. He told me I was making up crazy, fabricated stories to cover my own deep guilt and massive, pathetic insecurity about my low salary. He said they spent my entire wedding weekend mourning the tragic, emotional loss of their terrible son. It was textbook, aggressive, psychological gaslighting. They were actively trying to completely rewrite strict reality and make me the crazy, unstable villain of my own life. I did not argue. I did not scream back into the receiver. I just quietly pressed the end call button and hung up the phone. I realized in that dark, clarifying moment you absolutely cannot negotiate with toxic, deeply sick people who are fiercely committed to entirely misunderstanding you. 10 short months later, the massive, explosive bomb dropped on the entire family. Julian officially got engaged to a wealthy woman named Mia. Mia came from extremely old, protected money, drove a brand new white Range Rover she didn't pay for, and openly treated retail workers, nurses, and waitstaff like absolute garbage. She was the absolute perfect, deeply superficial match for my arrogant brother. Within 24 hours of their grand engagement announcement, my parents went into full, frantic millionaire production mode. They quickly sent out massive, glossy, custom-printed engagement announcements with professional photography to the entire extended family. My mother bragged endlessly on every social media platform that they were proudly contributing $100,000 in cash to Julian's massive wedding budget. She posted dozens of obnoxious pictures of them privately touring exclusive, members-only country clubs, tasting elaborate, expensive menus from famous Michelin star chefs, and shopping for imported, custom-tailored designer suits in the city. It was a massive, flashy, completely sickening spectacle of extreme wealth and blatant favoritism. Our extended relatives started calling my phone constantly. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had attended my modest, beautiful wedding were extremely confused and completely disgusted by the display. They asked me directly why my parents were willingly throwing a royal, six-figure wedding for Julian when they could not even be bothered to drive across town to show up to a local botanical garden to see me get married. For the very first time in my entire adult life, I stopped covering for my terrible parents. I stopped making excuses and saying they had a sudden scheduling conflict. I completely stopped protecting their pristine, carefully crafted public image. I told the absolute, unvarnished, brutal truth. I told my shocked aunts and uncles exactly what happened that weekend. I told them about the deliberately ignored RSVPs, the embarrassing empty chairs at the front of the aisle, the incredibly selfish midnight text about Julian's birthday party, and the psychotic, screaming, gaslighting phone call where they called me delusional and mentally ill. I did not yell into the phone. I did not cry to my relatives. I just laid out the cold, hard, verifiable facts, leaving absolutely no room for interpretation or doubt. The reaction was incredibly swift and absolutely immediate. Our extended family is quite large, and the vast majority of them are hardworking, honest, middle-class people who value deep familial loyalty far over flashy, inherited money. The tide began to rapidly turn completely against my parents. Relatives started formally declining Julian's extravagant engagement party invitations in droves. The quiet, underlying whisper network in our family suddenly exploded into a deafening roar of judgment. People finally realized with absolute clarity that the perfect, flawless image my parents aggressively projected was actually built entirely on a dark, rotting foundation of emotional abuse, blatant favoritism, and cruel manipulation. But my arrogant parents were not going to go down without a massive, incredibly dirty fight. When the thick, expensive RSVP cards for Julian's lavish, over-the-top engagement party started rapidly coming back in the mail stamped with firm, undeniable negative responses, my parents completely panicked. They quickly realized their precious, highly guarded social standing within the entire family structure was rapidly crumbling into absolute dust. They desperately needed to completely control the narrative, and they needed to do it incredibly fast before the massive reputational damage became totally permanent and irreversible. My mother, acting out of sheer desperation, decided to arrogantly double down on her massive, unbelievable lie about never receiving my wedding invitation. She typed up and forwarded a long, incredibly fake email to the entire massive family mailing list. The email was supposedly written and sent by me, dated exactly a year ago to the day. In this totally fabricated email, I supposedly stated in a very cold tone that Sarah and I were having a microscopic, highly private wedding ceremony, and that parents were explicitly and intentionally not invited under any circumstances. She added a long, incredibly dramatic, tearjerker message at the very top of the forwarded thread about how her tender motherly heart was deeply, irreparably broken by my cruelty, but she bravely respected my harsh wishes because she loved me so incredibly much. It was a very bold, aggressively manipulative move, but my mother is absolutely terrible with modern technology. She entirely forged the complex email from scratch on her laptop, and in her frantic haste, she made a massive, glaring, completely fatal mistake that would ruin her entirely and permanently expose her lies. My younger cousin Chloe is a senior cybersecurity analyst for a major, global tech firm. Dealing with digital footprints is literally her entire career. Within 10 short minutes of receiving that ridiculous, poorly faked email, Chloe hit reply all. She clinically, systematically pointed out that the hidden digital timestamp on the supposedly year-old email did not match the hidden server routing data embedded in the code. She expertly pointed out that the specific font formatting and internal HTML structure were entirely inconsistent with my specific, known email client. But the absolute best, most completely devastating part of her brilliant reply? My mother had stupidly forgotten to change the internal time zone on her expensive laptop. The forged email was supposedly sent by me from my home in Ohio, but the internal, hidden timestamp was officially stamped in Pacific Standard Time. That was exactly the time zone where my mother had been vacationing at a luxury resort just last week when she clearly sat down in her hotel room and maliciously fabricated the fake document. Chloe's detailed, highly technical reply was ruthless, highly clinical, and completely undeniably factual. The massive family group chat went completely, terrifyingly silent for hours. There was absolutely no defense. My mother had been caught completely red-handed committing literal digital forgery just to make her own flesh and blood son look like a monster in front of the entire family. Julian, realizing very quickly that his grand $100,000 wedding plans and crucial social status were being heavily overshadowed and ruined by this massive, extremely embarrassing public scandal, decided to take matters into his own hands. He knew with absolute certainty he could not intimidate or bully me directly anymore, so he tried to quietly, maliciously manipulate Sarah behind my back. He easily found her professional verified profile on LinkedIn and sent her an incredibly long, highly patronizing, desperately manipulative direct message. He told Sarah, using his best corporate speak, that complex family dynamics were very difficult to correctly navigate and that my intense, irrational emotional sensitivity was entirely blinding me to real-world corporate reality. Then, he tried to aggressively use his corporate weight and flashy job title. He told Sarah that his elite, exclusive network in the regional healthcare administration sector was vast, powerful, and highly influential. He heavily, illegally implied that if she could just somehow convince me to issue a formal, public apology to my parents and agree to attend his wedding to keep up perfect appearances for his wealthy in-laws, he could personally ensure she got a massive, career-making promotion. He promised a shiny new title and a massive, life-changing salary bump at her pediatric clinic by pulling a few strings. He actually genuinely thought he could easily buy my wife's absolute loyalty and silence with an empty, sleazy corporate bribe. Sarah read the incredibly long, pathetic message while we were peacefully eating dinner at our kitchen table. She read the words, looked up at me, and laughed so incredibly hard she actually spilled her red wine all over the granite counter. She did not even bother to consult me or ask my opinion before aggressively typing her reply. She just intensely typed out a response on her phone keyboard, her eyes flashing with pure fire, and hit send immediately without a second thought. She wrote exactly this. Julian, I am a fully licensed, highly educated pediatric therapist, not a desperate, entry-level marketing intern. My professional career is entirely built on years of intense, grueling medical expertise and genuine patient care, not cheap, sleazy country club connections and nepotism. Your highly unethical offer to manipulate my professional career is deeply insulting, but your arrogant, utterly pathetic assumption that my husband has a cheap price tag is genuinely the saddest thing I have ever read. Do not ever attempt to contact me or my husband again. Enjoy the Porsche, you are going to need it to drive away from this mess. Julian blocked her professional account immediately. He was completely out of his depth and he finally knew it. His entire pampered, sheltered life, he had strictly relied on my wealthy parents to completely pave his easy way, fix his massive mistakes, and throw massive amounts of money at his problems until they disappeared. Now, he was facing two strong, independent adults who did not want a single dime of his dirty money, did not respect his hollow, made-up corporate title, and absolutely, entirely refused to play his twisted, manipulative little games. The storm was fully brewing now, dark and heavy. The absolute battle lines were officially, permanently drawn deep in the sand. My parents were backed tightly into a corner of their own making, their pristine, perfect reputation actively burning to the ground in front of everyone they knew, and Julian was rapidly losing his captive, adoring audience. But I had absolutely no idea that the real, massive, life-altering explosion was still patiently waiting to happen, and it would come from the most unexpected place possible. The total collapse of my parents' carefully constructed empire did not begin with a massive cinematic shouting match in the middle of a crowded street. It began in the quiet intimacy of my own home, with a simple phone call on a rainy Thursday evening. Sarah and I were sitting comfortably in our living room, the television playing some mindless local news segment in the background. The rain was tapping gently against the glass windows, creating a peaceful rhythm. Then, my cell phone started vibrating aggressively on the wooden coffee table. The bright screen illuminated the dim room, and the caller ID flashed my father's name in bold black letters. For a brief, terrifying second, the old, deeply conditioned childhood anxiety flared up instantly in the center of my chest. My heart rate spiked. This was the man whose heavy footsteps in the hallway used to make me freeze in absolute terror when I was 10 years old. But then I looked over at Sarah. I looked at my brilliant, fiercely loyal wife, and I suddenly remembered the disgusting, manipulative message my brother Julian had sent her on LinkedIn. I remembered my parents completely abandoning us on our wedding day. In that exact moment, the lingering childhood fear entirely evaporated. It was replaced by a sense of absolute, freezing, undeniable clarity. I reached forward, picked up the phone, and firmly pressed the green speaker button so Sarah could hear every single word of the conversation. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice completely flat, steady, and entirely devoid of any readable emotion. He did not even bother to say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. He launched straight into a vicious, full-volume, unhinged screaming match that rattled the tiny speaker on my phone. He aggressively told me that I was actively trying to completely destroy the entire family from the inside out. He screamed until his voice cracked that my vicious, calculated lies were single-handedly ruining Julian's beautiful, expensive wedding plans. He yelled that our extended relatives were suddenly canceling their formal RSVPs by the dozens, and that I was a jealous, pathetic, miserable loser who simply could not handle the undeniable fact that my younger brother had a massive corporate salary and was far more successful than I would ever be. He said that because of my psychotic, relentless campaign of manipulation, my mother was supposedly crying every single day in her bedroom, and their wealthy friends at the country club were starting to ask them extremely invasive, embarrassing questions about their personal lives. Then came the absolute peak of his massive delusion. He actually had the sheer, unmitigated audacity to demand that I sit down, pick up my phone, call every single extended family member on the contact list, issue a formal, groveling apology to clear his name, and tell everyone that my mother never received my wedding invitation. He wanted me to lie to protect the very people who had spent my entire life breaking me down. I let him scream for 3 full minutes without interrupting. I just sat there, listening to his heavy, labored breathing, his uncontrollable rage, and his absolute, pathetic desperation. He was losing total control of the narrative, and it was tearing his massive ego apart. And then, for the very first time in my 32 years of life, I did not apologize. I did not instinctively back down to avoid his wrath. I did not try to desperately keep the peace. I unleashed 3 decades of repressed, agonizing reality straight into the receiver with surgical precision. "Let me tell you exactly what is going to happen tonight, Dad," I said, cutting him off so sharply and coldly that he actually gasped for air on the other end of the line. "I am not calling anyone. I am not lifting a single finger to fix this massive, embarrassing mess that you and Mom created. You made a choice 10 months ago. You chose to skip your eldest son's wedding. You treated my wedding day like it was an inconvenient funeral that you could not be bothered to attend. You looked at the son who worked brutal night shifts at the local hospital, who saved every penny of his own modest salary to pay for his nursing degree so you wouldn't have to spend a dime, and you decided I was completely worthless. You spent your entire adult lives pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into Julian's massive college fund while explicitly telling me to figure out my own financial aid. You threw a massive party to celebrate his shiny new Porsche while openly mocking my valedictorian diploma in the kitchen. And now, because people finally see exactly who you are behind closed doors, you want me to lie for you? You want me to be the convenient human shield for your disgusting, toxic favoritism? Absolutely not. How dare you speak to your father like that?" My mother suddenly shrieked in the background. She must have been silently listening on another extension the entire time, waiting for her moment to strike. "We gave you absolutely everything. We put a solid roof over your head. We fed you. You are a deeply ungrateful, hateful, spiteful child. You gave me a house, Mom, but you never gave me an actual home," I replied, my voice dangerously steady, completely unaffected by her shrill screaming. "You spent your entire life aggressively protecting Julian from the natural consequences of his own terrible actions. You used your connections to buy his way into a massive corporate promotion. You threw money at lawyers to buy his way out of trouble when he wrecked his first car. And now you are desperately trying to buy his perfect, flawless wedding. But you cannot buy our family's genuine respect. They finally see you. They finally see that the perfect, wealthy family image you care so desperately about is nothing but a cheap, hollow, fabricated lie. Do not ever call this number again. If you or Julian attempt to contact me or my wife again, I will instantly consult a lawyer, file a restraining order, and hit you with a massive harassment lawsuit so fast it will make your head spin. Have a great time at the wedding. I firmly hit the red end call button. The sudden silence in my living room was incredibly deafening. I looked down at my hands. They were slightly shaking, not from fear, but from the massive adrenaline rush of finally standing up for myself. The heavy, suffocating physical weight I had carried in the center of my chest since early childhood was completely, entirely gone. I had finally stood up to my lifelong abusers. I had finally drawn a permanent, unbreakable line in the sand. Sarah stood up, walked over to the couch, wrapped her arms tightly around my neck, and kissed the top of my head. We honestly thought that was the absolute end of the family drama. We naively thought they would just fade quietly into the background and leave us alone to live our lives in peace. But my mother's massive, fragile ego simply could not handle being publicly exposed as a manipulative liar. She desperately needed to win. She needed to prove to the entire extended family that I was the evil villain of this story. And that desperate, blinding need to be absolutely right led her straight into the most devastating, publicly humiliating trap imaginable. 2 weeks after that phone call, it was the annual summer family reunion barbecue at my Uncle Robert's sprawling, incredibly expensive estate. Uncle Robert is the wealthy, undisputed patriarch of our extended family. He holds the literal keys to the massive family real estate trust, a portfolio worth millions, and he strictly controls a very significant financial inheritance that my parents had been completely banking on for their lavish retirement plans. Sarah and I politely declined the formal invitation to the barbecue because we knew my parents would be there, and we absolutely refused to participate in their toxic, exhausting circus. According to my younger cousin Chloe, the atmosphere at the beautiful outdoor barbecue was incredibly thick and tense. People were quietly whispering in small groups. Relatives were actively avoiding my parents, giving them awkward nods and quickly walking away. My mother, completely unable to read the room or understand the concept of a graceful retreat, decided she needed to aggressively take control of the family narrative. She stood up near the massive, stainless steel outdoor grill, holding a large glass of expensive white wine, and loudly started complaining about me to my Aunt Clara, who is a known family gossip. She began aggressively playing the ultimate, wounded victim for anyone who would listen. I just do not understand why Liam is doing this terrible thing to us, my mother loudly lamented, intentionally raising her voice to ensure it carried across the entire crowded patio. He knows perfectly well that we never got that wedding invitation. He purposely sent it to the wrong address just so he could play the victim and publicly humiliate Julian. Liam has always been so intensely jealous of Julian's massive salary and incredible corporate success. It absolutely breaks my heart into a million pieces that he is tearing this wonderful family apart over a simple postal error. She genuinely thought she had a sympathetic, captive audience. She truly thought she could manipulate the narrative one last time. But she completely underestimated my Aunt Clara's sharp memory, and she entirely forgot that my incredibly smart cousin Chloe, the senior cybersecurity analyst who had expertly exposed her forged email just weeks prior, was sitting quietly on a lawn chair less than 10 feet away, with her smartphone already in her hand. I thought I knew exactly how low my parents could go, but I was about to find out that there is absolutely no bottom to their cruelty. Aunt Clara, who had spent decades quietly observing my mother's subtle manipulations, finally reached her breaking point. She slowly crossed her arms over her chest, set her drink down on the patio table, and looked at my mother with absolute, unmasked disgust. "Eleanor," Clara said sharply, her voice easily cutting through the ambient noise of the outdoor party and the sizzling grill. "Stop lying right now. Chloe already proved to the entire family that you completely faked that ridiculous email. We all clearly saw the digital timestamp. We know exactly what you did. We know you are lying through your teeth. So just tell us the absolute truth for once in your life. Why didn't you go to your own eldest son's wedding?" My mother physically recoiled as if she had been slapped across the face. She was entirely unused to being challenged so publicly and so directly by anyone in the family. She flushed bright, angry red, the white wine sloshing dangerously in her glass as her hand trembled with sheer rage. She completely panicked, cornered and humiliated. Her carefully constructed, elegant social mask completely slipped off her face. The ugly, venomous, unvarnished truth finally poured out of her mouth in a moment of pure, uncontrolled, blinding fury. "Fine!" my mother shrieked, her voice echoing violently across the sudden, dead silence of the large patio. Everyone stopped eating. Everyone turned to stare. "You really want the truth?" "Yes, we got his stupid, cheap little invitation. We got it weeks in advance. But it was the exact same weekend that Julian finally secured a private, highly exclusive fitting with that famous Italian designer in the city for his custom, imported tuxedo. It took us 6 grueling months to get that VIP appointment. Julian's wedding is going to be heavily featured in a high-end bridal magazine. It is a massive, crucial networking event for his corporate career and his future. Liam's little backyard botanical garden party was it was nothing. It was literally just a bunch of low-level nurses and physical therapists drinking cheap beer and eating dry chicken. We had to aggressively prioritize the son who is actually doing something important with his life, the son who actually has a real salary. The entire sprawling backyard went completely, terrifyingly silent. You could literally hear the summer wind rustling through the large oak trees. No one moved. No one spoke. My mother stood there, her chest heaving, breathing heavily, slowly realizing exactly what she had just loudly confessed in front of 30 stunned family members. She had just publicly admitted, with absolute arrogant pride and incredible venom, that she and my father actively, consciously chose to go luxury suit shopping rather than attend their eldest son's wedding, simply because they viewed my noble career and my entire existence as completely worthless compared to Julian's superficial materialistic status. And the absolute best, most poetic part of this entire disaster? My cousin Chloe caught every single agonizing, screaming second of that unhinged, hateful rant on crisp, high-definition 4K video. Within exactly 10 minutes of the outburst, my phone pinged on the kitchen counter. Chloe had sent me the large video file directly with a single, powerful text message: "Justice." Sarah and I sat closely together on our living room couch and watched the video in stunned silence. We watched my mother's face contort with genuine, unmistakable disgust when she talked about my beautiful wedding. We heard the absolute, pure venom in her voice when she loudly called my entire life nothing. I did not cry. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness or grief. I felt incredibly, powerfully, overwhelmingly vindicated. It was the absolute, undeniable, concrete proof of everything I had been screaming into the lonely void for my entire life. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overly sensitive. They really were monsters. But Chloe did not just safely send the video to me. She was absolutely merciless. She dropped the heavy video file directly into the massive family group chat for every single aunt, uncle, and cousin to see. The immediate fallout was completely nuclear. It was swift, ruthless, and absolutely devastating for my parents' social standing. The very next morning, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw it was Uncle Robert. Now, Uncle Robert is an old-school, tough-as-nails, highly successful businessman. He built his massive wealth from absolutely nothing, and he fiercely values family loyalty, hard work, and integrity above absolutely everything else. I took a deep breath and answered the phone. "Hello, Uncle Robert." "Liam." His deep, gravelly voice came heavily through the phone speaker. He sounded incredibly old, deeply tired, and profoundly heartbroken. "I saw the video. I saw exactly what your mother said. And I saw the fake email Chloe exposed last week." He paused for a long moment, and to my absolute, complete shock, I clearly heard this massive, intimidating, wealthy patriarch choke back a heavy sob. "I am so sorry, son. I am so incredibly, deeply sorry to you and Sarah. We all knew your parents heavily favored Julian. We saw it clearly when you were little kids. But we looked the other way because we did not want the family drama. We let them treat you like absolute dirt, and we fully enabled their horrific behavior by staying silent to keep the peace." Seeing those empty chairs at your wedding in the photos, and now hearing the sickening, materialistic reason why they weren't there, I feel completely ashamed of this entire family. You do not have to apologize to me, Uncle Robert, I said softly, my throat tightening with completely unexpected emotion. Yes, I absolutely do, he replied firmly, his voice regaining its usual commanding strength. And I am going to finally make it right. I just got off a 2-hour phone call with my corporate lawyer. I am completely, legally restructuring the entire family real estate trust today. Your parents are entirely, permanently removed from the executive board, and I am officially altering my last will and testament. They will not see a single dime of my inheritance. Not a penny. If they genuinely think flashy imported suits and expensive country club memberships are more important than their own flesh and blood, they can pay for it themselves for the rest of their lives. Furthermore, I have officially called Julian and informed him that I will absolutely not be attending his wedding under any circumstances. I explicitly told him that any family member who attends that disgusting, superficial spectacle of vanity will be entirely, permanently cut off from my businesses and my estate. They desperately wanted a high society wedding without you? Let them have it completely alone. The absolute power and finality of Uncle Robert's legal and financial decision rippled through the entire extended family like a massive, undeniable earthquake. He was the absolute financial cornerstone of the family. His explicit vocal boycott, backed by the terrifying threat of losing the family inheritance, was the ultimate, inescapable death blow to Julian's perfect, expensive day. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The total, unmitigated destruction of Julian's massive wedding was an absolute masterpiece of pure karmic justice. As the extremely expensive date rapidly approached, the formal RSVP cancellations flooded my parents' mailbox like a biblical plague. It wasn't just my incredibly supportive aunts and uncles who abruptly pulled out. Once Uncle Robert made his absolute, uncompromising financial stance completely known, even the distant cousins, the casual family friends, and the ambitious business associates rapidly decided they absolutely did not want to be caught standing on the wrong side of the wealthy family patriarch. Julian had proudly, arrogantly booked the most expensive, highly exclusive hotel grand ballroom in the entire city. The luxury venue strictly required a massive minimum guest count of 300 people just to justify the insane catering minimums and the famous celebrity chef they had flown in specifically for the event. A week before the wedding, their confirmed guest list had plummeted drastically to less than 40 people. It was an absolute, complete, unmitigated financial disaster. My parents panicked completely. They were legally on the hook for over $100,000 in strict, non-refundable venue deposits and vendor contracts. They tried desperately to frantically invite random neighbors, casual coworkers, and passing acquaintances just to desperately fill the massive, echoing room so it would not look completely pathetic and embarrassing in the expensive magazine photographs they had planned. But the absolute worst, most devastating blow came directly from Julian's own fiancée, Mia. Mia was a calculating social climber who cared exclusively about flawless public appearances, high society status, and massive inherited wealth. When she slowly realized that Julian's wealthy, connected family was actively, aggressively boycotting the wedding, and far more importantly, when she found out through the country club grapevine that Julian and his parents had been entirely, legally cut out of Uncle Robert's massive real estate inheritance, her entire demeanor changed instantly. She coldly realized she was no longer marrying into a powerful, deeply respected financial dynasty. She was marrying into a publicly disgraced, deeply toxic, fragmented family that was rapidly losing its financial backing and social clout. Exactly 3 days before the massive wedding was supposed to take place, Mia's high-priced, ruthless lawyer sent Julian a highly aggressive, heavily modified post-nuptial legal agreement. It essentially demanded absolute, complete control over their combined finances and included terrifying, incredibly restrictive clauses regarding potential future divorce proceedings, and absolute sole custody arrangements for any future children, heavily favoring Mia in every single scenario. She was already coldly planning her lucrative exit strategy before she even walked down the aisle. When Julian, deeply offended and completely shocked, arrogantly refused to sign the predatory legal document, Mia threatened to cancel the entire expensive wedding immediately and publicly blame his family's toxic, embarrassing drama for the highly publicized split. Julian was completely, utterly trapped. The flawless golden child, the boy who had never faced a single solitary consequence in his entire pampered, protected life, was finally being violently crushed under the immense, suffocating weight of his own family's arrogant, terrible actions. The actual day of Julian's wedding finally arrived. I absolutely did not attend, of course. I was busy working a highly demanding, exhausting 12-hour double shift in the ER trauma unit, saving human lives and doing the exact job my arrogant father claimed was completely worthless. But I heard the extremely pathetic, satisfying details the next day from my older cousin Mark, who ironically ended up being one of the absolute only people desperate enough to actually show up, hoping for a free, expensive meal and an open bar. According to Mark's detailed account, the grand, luxurious ballroom looked like an absolute, terrifying ghost town. The massive, glittering crystal chandeliers illuminated dozens of completely empty, fully set tables. The expensive, imported floral arrangements looked incredibly sad and completely ridiculous surrounding massive, echoing empty spaces on the dance floor. The celebrity chef was reportedly furious about cooking elaborate, expensive meals for a nearly empty, depressing room. My mother supposedly spent the entire miserable evening crying loudly in the luxury marble bathroom, utterly humiliated that her high society friends were personally witnessing this massive, undeniable social and financial failure. My father drank heavily at the open bar, staring blankly at the hotel wall, finally realizing that his arrogant, cruel choices had literally cost him his reputation, his entire extended family, and his future comfortable retirement inheritance. And Julian, the perfect, flawless, untouchable golden child, spent his incredibly expensive, highly anticipated wedding night screaming at his new bride in the middle of the hotel lobby because she coldly refused to take professional photos with his publicly disgraced parents. Their marriage started exactly how it was built, on a highly unstable foundation of superficial lies, intense arrogance, and bitter, simmering resentment. They were completely, utterly, undeniably miserable. As for me, the massive, spectacular implosion of my biological family did not destroy me in the slightest. In fact, cutting them completely and permanently out of my life was the absolute best, most incredibly healthy decision I have ever made in my entire existence. Once I finally stopped wasting my precious, limited emotional energy desperately trying to earn the basic love of people who were entirely incapable of giving it, my life began to flourish in incredible, undeniable, beautiful ways. 6 months after the massive family fallout and the disastrous wedding, my extreme dedication, long hours, and hard work at the hospital finally paid off in a massive, life-changing way. I was officially promoted to the head charge nurse of the entire emergency department. It was a massive, highly respected promotion that came with incredible daily responsibility, deep, genuine respect from the elite trauma surgeons I worked closely with, and a massive, life-altering increase in my annual salary. I quickly realized I didn't need a fancy, fabricated corporate title, an imported luxury car, or a custom-tailored suit to successfully prove my worth to the world. I proved my profound worth every single day by actively pulling terrified people back from the absolute brink of death. But the absolute greatest, most profound joy of my entire life happened just last month. Sarah, my beautiful, brilliant wife, gave birth to our incredibly beautiful, perfectly healthy baby boy. When I held my tiny, sleeping son in my arms for the very first time in that quiet, dimly lit hospital room, looking down at his incredibly small fingers and his peaceful, perfect face, I made a silent, unbreakable, sacred vow to him. I promised him, with tears streaming down my face, that he would never, ever have to aggressively compete for my love and attention. I promised him that he would never, ever feel like a secondary, unimportant option in his own warm home. I promised him that whether he grew up to be a highly paid corporate CEO, a struggling artist, a public school teacher, or an ER nurse like me, I would be absolutely, undeniably, fiercely proud of him every single day of his life. My parents have frantically attempted to contact me a few times since their massive social and financial downfall. They mailed a cheap, generic greeting card to our house when they found out through the family grapevine that Sarah was heavily pregnant. They left a few crying, highly manipulative, pathetic voicemails on my phone talking about how life is entirely too short to hold bitter grudges and how blood family needs to stick together during hard times. I never opened the envelope. I threw the card directly into the trash. I never returned a single one of their desperate calls. I simply deleted the dramatic voicemails without a second thought and went happily back to cooking a warm dinner with my amazing wife. They absolutely do not get to magically walk back into my peaceful life now that their perfect, wealthy facade has completely crumbled into ash. They do not get to eagerly play the role of loving, doting grandparents to my beautiful son when they could not even be bothered to sit in a reserved chair at my wedding. I have successfully established a permanent, impenetrable, emotional and physical boundary. My real family is Sarah, our wonderful newborn son, her incredibly supportive and loving parents, and the true friends and relatives who actually showed up and stood by me when it mattered most. Sometimes the absolute best, most incredibly effective revenge is not screaming, plotting, or arguing until you are blue in the face. Sometimes the most devastating, powerful thing you can possibly do to toxic, manipulative people is to completely remove their access to your beautiful life, sit back in silence, and let their own horrible, selfish behavior completely destroy them from the inside out. I survived the darkest, most painful parts of my childhood. I survived the profound, agonizing heartbreak of my wedding day, and I emerged completely, entirely unbroken. I am a highly successful nurse, a deeply loved, respected husband, and an incredibly proud father, and I built absolutely all of it without them. Thank you so much for listening to my entire journey today. Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, painful line in the sand to protect your own mental health and your future? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.